Good evening. Thanks for joining this live webcast on mobilizing, mailing, and defending our votes in 2020. I'm Ted Lewis, Human Rights and Co-Director of Global Exchange. We have a fantastic panel tonight that features leaders from Mi Familia Vota, a national Latino civic organization, the historic Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and a dynamic new group called Vote From Home 2020. We will talk about what is at stake in this election and very practically what individual voters need to do to get ready and what ordinary folk can do to help assure that their friends, family, and communities are able to vote safely and effectively. We encourage you to submit questions in the comment section wherever you are watching, whether it's here with us on Zoom, on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook. We will answer as many of your questions as we can in the last part of this 1-hour program. Also, please take a moment right now to click and share this webcast with all the people in your social media universe. Everyone should have access to the information that we will be sharing. And please, if you feel moved, make a contribution to Global Exchange to keep these kind of vital programs coming your way. For those of you who have known Global Exchange as an international human rights organization and who might be wondering why we are working now to educate and mobilize voters in the United States, please remember our history. In recent decades, Global Exchange has organized high-level election observations in more than a dozen countries on 4 continents. We've watched elections that formalized liberation in South Africa, marked the end of armed conflicts in Central America, loosened the grip of dictatorships in Asia, and brought the end of one-party rule in Mexico. We know that elections count, and we know that votes matter. That's why in 2004, Global Exchange invited election officials and specialists from around the world to observe our elections here in the United States. In the months leading up to that year's presidential elections, they visited Arizona, Florida, Ohio, Missouri, and California, and they issued a stunning report that underlined the antique and decentralized nature of voting in the world's oldest democracy. They noted improvements made by the 15th Amendment, allowing Black men to vote, the 19th Amendment that allowed women to vote, and the advances facilitated by the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that aimed to end the era of Jim Crow voter exclusion. But they also noted that many vulnerabilities and structures of unfairness remain baked into American democracy. In 2020, we face some of these very old issues and problems now mixed with new ones, like a global pandemic that can make in-person voting a high-risk proposition, especially for vulnerable voters. Please join me in welcoming our fantastic panel. With us tonight from Washington, D.C., Dr. Gabriela Lemus, president of the Mi Familia Vota Education Fund and a leader of the Center for Common Ground's Reclaim Our Vote campaign. Also in Washington, D.C., Lee Chapman, director of the Voting Rights Program of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, an historic bulwark of voting rights defense since its founding in the 1950s. And from Phoenix, Arizona, Eduardo Sainz, director of the Arizona headquarters of Mi Familia Vota. Eduardo works nationally to inform and mobilize Spanish-speaking and Latinx voters. And from Southern California, please welcome Suzy Smith, co-founder of Vote From Home 2020. She is a leading provider of vote from home information nationwide. So we want to look first at what is at stake in these elections. Lee, we'd like to go to you first with that question. What is at stake in these elections?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Ted, and for Global Exchange for hosting this panel. My name is Lee Chapman, and I'm the director of the Voting Rights Program at the Leadership Conference. And the Leadership Conference is the nation's largest and oldest civil rights coalition. We've been around for 70 years, and we've been on the front lines of every major civil rights law passage, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So as far as what's at stake, we are currently in a moment of reckoning in our country, with the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the recent shooting of Jacob Blake, and so many countless Black Americans who have lost their lives to police violence. Voting is not going to magically solve all of our nation's problems, but it's really the necessary action that we all must take to use our power. If people want to end the killing of Black Americans by the police, or fix our criminal justice system, or make sure we have better schools and education, we all have to vote. And remember, the elected officials work for us, the voters. So right now we're 67 days away from the general election, and our democracy really is in a crisis moment right now. As you know, voters of color, people with disabilities, young people, students, and people with limited English proficiency have historically faced and continue to face barriers to the ballot box in 2020. Instead of tactics like literacy tests and poll taxes that were implemented in the past to prevent Black and brown voters from casting their ballot, in recent years, we've seen modern day voter suppression tactics around the country, like strict voter ID laws, voter purges, and mass closures of polling places. And what we're seeing right now is that COVID-19 is just another barrier to the ballot that voters are facing. And voters of color are the most impacted by the virus and also by voter suppression. And the chaos at the primaries is a wake-up call for our democracy. On the day of primaries in states like Georgia and Wisconsin, some voters of color stood in lines for up to 7 hours just to cast their ballot. And we cannot have a repeat of this in November. Policymakers and state officials must make changes now to protect and make sure voters can have safe and accessible elections in November.
Thank you very much. Eduardo, can you answer the same question? From your point of view, what's at stake in these elections?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ted and Global Exchange, for putting this together. My name is Eduardo Sainz. I'm the director for Arizona, and I'm very glad to share this space and call Mi Familia Vota home. Mi Familia Vota has been one of the leading organizations in Arizona and across the country to engage Latinos and immigrants that traditionally don't participate in the election because of the systems that have been in place to limit communities of color and immigrants from participating. We have so much at stake this election. I think, not to reiterate what my colleague said, but our community has been suffering, and we see it now more than ever. We have hundreds of calls, and we've been able to do more than 1 million conversations with voters in Arizona, text message, more than 500,000 text messages. And time after time, our community is worried about what they're going to put in their table. How can they ensure that their kids have quality education? And we are disproportionately affected right now. We are hear conversations from parents being worried about not having access to internet, high-speed internet, having access to a reliable computer for their kids to be able to continue to obtain their education from home. There's so much at stake, from economic, education, immigration, access to healthcare on this election, and we need to make sure that every single voter that it's out there. There is 32 million Latinos that are eligible to register to vote, and we need to make sure that everybody that has the right to vote is participating in this election, so we could have a system that is reflected on our values and that is reflected in the priorities that we have as a community.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. Gabriela, you've been in this for a while. You're speaking from Washington, D.C. What can you tell us? What are you seeing in the national panorama? What's at stake here?
Well, there's a lot at stake, obviously, as you've just heard. And, to add to that, I would add that there are so many issues that we're seeing right now related to things like climate change and policies that matter to us. Louisiana just got hit by this terrible hurricane. We've been talking about COVID. We talk a lot in DC about things like intersectionality, but the reality is that when you look at issues like the loss of insurance, the loss of quality access to quality health care, its impacts on not just communities of color, but low-income communities. When you look at the number of people who have lost their jobs And then you then do the math and then go look at the communities of color and see how it's even worse in those communities. Yeah, there's a lot at stake. And the issue here is, I'll know there's some apathy out there, and I've been listening to people tell me, well, my vote doesn't matter. I mean, that's still happening. And the truth is, your vote does matter, and it is the first step, but it's the first step. So what's at stake is I mean, I don't mean to be melodramatic, but it's our democracy and it's our practice as democratic society, and we don't want to lose that. And right now, with so much, well, the protests rose up and COVID showed the breaks that have happened in our system that have been there for a long time, and that's at stake. That's us. That's our lives. So, you know, many of the folks I work with say things like, vote like it, you know, like your life, it's, you know, it matters for your life. I think that's true. But I also think there's another component that we forget about, and that is that the act of voting brings us into that direct contact with our ability to participate. And I often joke, I am the happiest when I'm voting. I come out of the voting booth and I'm thrilled. I'm looking for my little sticker. I want my sticker. I voted, and I'm proud to wear it. And it's a family event. You know, Mi Familia Vota, my family votes. In fact, in 2016, my entire family, we went together to the polls. And it's a way of bringing us together as a community and as a family.
Fantastic. Thank you. Suzy, are we going to be able to get that same feeling by voting from home? I want to ask you another question as well. We just got one of our first questions in, and it works for you. Michael Fisher asks, what organizations can we work with to help our people vote at home? So tell us about Vote from Home and what's at stake for you.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. So this is why we started Vote from Home 2020. I've worked on campaigns for a long time, and I think a lot of us, since the day after Election Day in 2016, were waiting for this election cycle. And so many things happened in 2020 that none of us could have expected, that really put the brakes on getting out and knocking on doors, talking to our neighbors. We have to stay apart in order to stop the spread of COVID, but we still need to reach out to our neighbors and get them the information they need to vote. We can't let this stop us. So I was actually making calls ahead of the Wisconsin primary, and I just couldn't in good conscience tell people who hadn't received their absentee ballot yet to go line up and put their health at risk to vote. And so I thought, we can't have this happen in November. So we need to use all of this volunteer energy that has been pent up for, nearly 4 years to make sure that people can safely vote at home. So we've identified 2.5 million dual risk voters. So people that are most likely to contract COVID-19 and the least likely to apply for an absentee ballot. And so these are folks who haven't voted at home before because they haven't needed to, because going to the polls and voting early or on election day worked just fine. But we want to make sure that the health crisis doesn't keep these people from voting. So we started reaching out to these folks in June to talk about their voting plan, which is unprecedented. To text and call someone and say, have you thought about how you're voting in November, is really a lot sooner than we expected, but we thought it was necessary because we need to get folks the information that they're craving, which is this secure? How do I do this? Because I've never done before. Can I trust it? And we're really walking them through the process every step of the way. We have this plan called the life cycle organizing method, where we reach out to them before they apply. We get them the information. We reach out to them after they get their application. We ask them if they, are undecided about voting from home. And then we reach out to them again ahead of their ballot coming, and then after their ballot has arrived, to make sure they return it on time and that their vote is counted. And we're really seeing, it's enlightening. We actually just hit our 1 millionth voter contacted. So we've been texting and calling people for 2 months. And we're seeing people who say, I've never voted from home. Can I trust, the U.S. Postal Service and all of the things going on in the news? And I think it really makes a difference to have a trusted person who's reached out to them, walking them through the process every step of the way. And so that's what we're really fortunate to be doing, and glad that we got a jump start on it starting in June, because I think it's definitely necessary to make sure that these people who could potentially put their health at risk have options for voting from home.
Thank you so much. That's great. And we are now into the practical, part of the webcast, the how-to. Eduardo, I want you to talk about what you're doing and how you're helping people, particularly there in Arizona, to vote massively, vote from home, vote however is most practical. But we just got a question in that I'm going to run by you, and anybody else can think about this one too. Chicago's Channel 7 News, Maurice Blecker has sent us his questions. Channel 7 News in Chicago reported this afternoon that the area voters are receiving robocalls telling them voting by mail is dangerous because voters' personal information will be shared with credit rating companies, immigration and health authorities, etc. How do we effectively counter this kind of bad information? None of that's true, but can you speak to that, Eduardo?
Absolutely. No, thank you so much, Ted. It's been a pleasure to continue to do the work here in Arizona and at the national level. Arizona has been one of the centers of voting by mail. We have what it's called PEVL, which is a permanent early voting list. So anybody that get registered to vote in Arizona could constantly be receiving their ballot on the mail for every single election that it's happening within their municipalities, statewide, federal elections, etc. In Arizona, close to 80% of our electorate participates on voting by mail. So it's a thing that we have done for over 15 years. Mi Familia Vota has been registering and making sure that people are signing up to the PEVL, which is a permanent early voting list, to ensure that it's as easy as possible to ensure that folks are participating. And, as our name is Mi Familia Vota, we want to make sure that all the family gets to participate. And we seen as we are doing door knocks and conversations over the phone, text messages, social media outreach, that community members really enjoyed having that private setting at home to ensure that they could brainstorm with their family members and make sure that they're making the right choice once they're voting. There's a lot of folks have about 22 days to vote, because that's usually when the ballots are get mailed to all of the voters. So you have more time than just one day to participate. And there's a lot of misinformation that it's trying to do one thing. It's trying to make sure that people like myself, people that look like us, don't participate in this election, and that people opt out of participating in this democracy. And that's why we are here to ensure that individuals understands about their importance of participating to vote by mail. It is very easy to vote by mail, and it's secure. We send checks, we send our taxes. It has been an institution that we have reflected, and we do a lot of business through mail. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of people of color, Latinos, Black and brown individuals that are participating in voting by mail, that now all of a sudden it's insecure. It's just a tactic to ensure that there is voter suppression in this election, and making it harder for individuals to participate and to ensure that their voices are heard on this election. One of the things that I love to see is a lot of politicians or individuals that have been saying that voting by mail it could become a fraud, or that they don't want individuals to participate on voting by mail. Funny story is that most of those individuals that are telling this narrative have been voting by mail for the last 10, 15 years in Arizona and across the different states that we operate. So we know that voting by mail, it's easy, it's convenient, and it gives us those extra days to participate and vote from the comfort of our homes.
Great. So you're saying don't believe the hype.
I mean, it's secure. We're voting. 80% of the electorate here in Arizona continues to vote by mail. We're looking into states like Nevada that they're going to mail a ballot to all of the voters that are registered to vote, to make sure that it's easy for them to participate in this election. California does a very similar process. Colorado, Florida, you have to request a ballot to make sure that you participate. And there are certain states, like for example, Texas, that it's very hard for individuals to participate to vote by mail. You have to be 65 years old to participate, and there's no other reason that Texas elections would allow you to vote by mail. We're having some efforts to make sure that we expand that, to make sure, since we have this pandemic, that we make it as easier for everybody to participate. We're in the works and trying to win that fight. But right now, we also want to encourage that there is an avenue for the majority of Americans across the US to participate in this election. And that has been something that everybody is looking to do to ensure that we are participating.
Thanks, Eduardo. Lee, what is the Leadership Conference doing to assure that people can vote safely, effectively this fall?
We're doing a lot. So we're doing a lot of federal and state advocacy. So even before COVID-19 hit, we knew this was going to be a huge year for elections to make sure that we were stopping barriers to the ballot. And so we launched a campaign called And Still I Vote on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, during the 55th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, to really shine a spotlight on voter suppression and to mobilize people to take action. So through that campaign, And Still I Vote, we've been advocating people all across the country to make sure our elections are safe and secure. So at the federal level, we've been pushing for the Congress to appropriate $3.6 billion in funding to make sure states have that immediate infusion of money to make sure that elections are safe and secure. We're also mobilizing in states to demand secretaries of state, county election officials, and state legislators to make secure drop boxes widely available and ensure that ballots that are postmarked on or before Election Day are counted within a reasonable number of days after. So we're doing advocacy on the federal and the state level, of course, also with the United States Postal Service and all the attacks with that. We've been advocating for an additional $25 billion in funding for the Postal Service, and also for the 671 mail sorting machines that were removed from 49 states around the country to be replaced immediately, as well as the mailboxes that were removed. But another thing we're doing is voter empowerment. We keep talking about the voter suppression tactics and the barriers to the ballot, but the best way to counter that is voter empowerment. So just letting voters know what they can do right now. So that includes going to register to vote, making sure you're checking your registration and that it's up to date, because as we all know, voter purges have been rampant around the country in recent years. 17 million voters were purged from the rolls between 2016 and 2018. So it's important that people check their registration to make sure they're on the rolls. And then, as Suzy and others mentioned, making a plan to vote early is so critical this year, whether that's voting by mail or voting early in person. You need to know where your polling place is, where your early voting location is. If you're going to return your ballot, know where your drop box location is, or, get it in the mail as soon as you fill it out to make sure that it's counted. And we're also advocating for people to be poll workers. A lot of the shuttering down of polling places around the country were because there were so many shortages of poll workers. And as you know, poll workers tend to be older voters. So we need to make sure that election officials are hiring younger poll workers. So we are a partner with this organization called Power the Polls. Their website is powerthepolls.org. And we're trying to recruit as many poll workers as we can around the country, so voters can have all the options to vote, whether that's via mail or early in person or in person on Election Day. We just need to make sure that people are safe and they have options.
Wow, you are doing a lot. That's really fantastic. Can you repeat for me the number you said about how many mail sorting machines have been removed from our post offices?
Yes, so 671 mail sorting machines have been removed from post offices and centers around the country in 49 states.
And that has all happened in the last what length of time? So the last year, or?
Really over the last few months. And, you know, the Postmaster General, he testified in a Senate hearing last Friday, in the House on Monday. He said that he's going to, you know, not make any changes, but he's not committed to replacing those sorting machines. And one sorting machine can sort up to 30,000 pieces of mail per hour. So you can imagine what a devastating impact this has on vote by mail. So that's why we're advocating for full restoration, for those machines to be replaced. And some postal workers in states like Washington State have just gone and replaced them because they want to make sure that, you know, ballots, you know, mail can be delivered in time, that people can get their prescriptions, that people can, you know, get their, you know, their mail and their critical necessities on time as well.
Thanks again so much. Gabriela, I know you have some comments and some slides to talk us through the process of getting ready, making your plan, making it effective. Can you tell us a little bit more about how we can go from wherever we are now to being fully empowered voters who vote ourselves, get our families to vote, and are involved in reaching out to our communities so as much voting as possible can happen?
Okay, well, I think I'll share a couple of slides to give people a sense of where to go. So in front of you, you know, I'm basically going to repeat a lot of what Lee said in terms of the different things that people can do and reinforce the message. So first off, you need to confirm that you're registered to vote, because precisely as she said, many voters have been purged, and you know, it tends to happen for low propensity voters. Although this just now I received, before I started here with you guys, I just received an email. Apparently someone was purged from the rolls because he had not filled out his census papers. And I know it's very odd. I've never heard this before, but I couldn't figure out what state it was in, or I'd share that with you, and ask you, Lee, to check into it, please. Because the reality is this is very odd. And then once he filled it out, they restored him back on the rolls. He had to prove that he'd filled out the census form, however, which I guess is good. We want the census filled, but I can think of better ways of going about it at any rate. The other issue to bring up is, you know, the vote by mail, as you've just heard, as Suzy has shared with you, and she's the expert on this. The third is early voting. And on the early voting point, it's important to really have a sense of each state. Each state handles things differently, know where to go. So I have three very, you know, big neutral websites that do nothing but help you get this information. I think it's helpful. I myself use thevote.org. I just helped my mom and dad this morning to register, not to register, we already did that, to get their vote by mail. We received a document from the governor saying that it's time, if you want to do vote by mail, you have to request your ballot. I live in Maryland right now. And so, you know, now I followed up, we got on the website, and it was very simple. We needed a driver's license and the last four numbers of your social security. It was a very secure process, and it connected me. What's beautiful about it, it doesn't matter what state it is, because it connects you to your state. And that makes it life easy. The other thing I thought might be helpful is this second slide, which is background information on voting by mail. There's been several stories just this week. So I just pulled three, one from the Washington Post, one from NPR, actually two from the Washington Post, on things that have happened, just for you to be aware, and also ensuring that your ballot is, you know, that you're doing it correctly, and to ensure that your ballot counts. I believe these have been shared with you in the chat. And then last, you know, part of this too, and we're all stuck at home, a lot of folks are volunteering and doing things from home. So I have, you know, three websites up here, one being, the two being from the organizations that I work with, Mi Familia Vota and the Center for Common Ground. And it's to volunteer, how to get involved. You can go to the website, you can phone bank, you can write postcards, you can text voters, you can work at the polls. And this working at the polls part, I really want to bring that up to young people. Through all the organizations I work with, there's a couple more that I haven't mentioned yet. I really feel that by connecting, it's a way to connect youth and to create the future generation of participants. And I think the more you understand how the process works, the more likely you are to do it for the rest of your life, but also get more people involved. So we've been reaching out to HBCUs and the historically Black colleges and universities, and partnering with them and getting young people who are expert. A lot of the things that are going on at the polls is they've changed machinery, for example. So like South Carolina and Georgia. And what you see there are older folks aren't as, they're not as gifted perhaps on technology as younger people are. They're not as facile. So, this is something that young people, like without even thinking, can look at it and figure it out in 3 minutes, right? Think cell phones. So, the more we, get them involved, the better. So other organizations are doing it as well. But these are just simple things that we can participate in that, helps keep our democracy vibrant. And I'm gonna stop the share. There you go. Thank you.
Gabby. That's wonderful. We just got another question in, or a comment here saying vote purging is entirely legal and it is regulated by federal and state laws. Lee, could you comment on that? Talk to us about voter purging. Is it perfectly normal and legal, or are there irregularities going on as well?
Sure. What's legal is called list maintenance, which is when someone passes away, right? They're removed from the rolls. What's not legal is purging from the rolls, when we're seeing states and election officials using things like jury recusal forms or census. I've never heard of that. So I'm glad Gabriella mentioned that. We could follow up and talk about it. Or some of these databases just to remove voters from the rolls. One thing that we've recently seen is that voters are being removed for not voting for a certain number of election cycles. And, Ohio was removing voters for doing it. And we believe that voting shouldn't be a use it or lose it privilege. So, that's problematic. And the Supreme Court has basically rubber stamped that process. I think there's a difference between list maintenance, which is okay, and that's routine, and purges, which is just like mass taking people off of the rolls.
Okay. Another question, it says, is it true that absentee ballots vary from state to state? And if the particular instructions aren't followed to a T, that the vote isn't counted? It says many tens of thousands of Korean American voters weren't counted in 2016 in California because their signatures were in Korean instead of English, even though the ballot was in Korean. I don't know if that's accurate, but any comment on how careful do you have to be with an absentee ballot to make sure that it meets all the requirements? Suzy, you want to?
Yeah, certainly. So we're working with voters to make sure that they firstly return the ballot on time, because that's the number one reason that ballots are rejected. The second highest reason that they're rejected is because the outside of the envelope isn't signed. And then the third most frequent reason is because of signature mismatch. And it's very tedious and also not really helpful to tell people, make sure you sign the ballots, so that it matches with what you signed on your voter registration or your DMV paperwork, because people don't remember that. And so we are working with basically lawyers to challenge these rules, because they do disenfranchise AAPI, Latinx, and Black voters at a much higher rate than white voters. But I think that the two most frequent reasons that ballots are rejected are preventable by walking voters through the process and making sure they check those two boxes of returning it on time and also signing the outside of the envelope so that it's accepted. but there are definitely legal battles that we need to fight in the courts to make sure that everyone has access to voting absentee equally, because it's not the case right now.
Okay. Well, a lot of you have answered this question in a sense already, that if I've already registered and gotten everyone I know lined up to vote, how can I get further involved in helping to encourage voting? A lot of the sites that Gabriela just shared should be able to take care of that. I think, Eduardo, you gave us information there. Do you want to tell us one more time how people from Eduardo can get from where we are now to being a fully empowered, voter? Just run us through it one more time. 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely. So if you want to volunteer, you're welcome to do so. There's a lot of different organizations that are welcoming you to make sure that we do voter outreach, that we participate in these elections. We want to make sure that everybody that can request a ballot through the mail gets to participate in the conference of their homes. We have a great partnership with Univision, and every Tuesday we have a hotline where individuals are calling us in, and those individuals are excited to participate in the election, and we need volunteers that could help us fill in those conversations and walk through voters into registering to vote online or through paper, etc., depending on the regulations of the state. There are different avenues of voter contact that we're doing right now during the pandemic, from phone conversations to text messages, digital social media, and then also looking into doing a couple of door knocks where we could leave very important election information at the doorsteps of the voters. And we want to make sure that we are engaging as many individuals as possible, because as we were opening earlier, there's so much at stake, from education to healthcare, immigration, worker rights. And in order to ensure that our values are being reflected, we want to make sure that our voices are being heard through the power of our vote. Again, 32 million Latinos in this country qualify to become registered voters. We need to make sure that we are closing that gap. Just in Arizona alone, there's 150,000 Latinos that are legal permanent residents but haven't become a U.S. citizen. And we know that there's individuals are so enthusiastic to become new citizens and to participate into this election. And we welcome you to ensure that we are participating in these elections. And for those of us that are mixed status or don't have the right to vote because we're immigrants, and getting into that pathway to become naturalized U.S. citizens, there's so much that we can do. We can call a friend and remind them to participate. We can ensure that we promote civic participation among our communities. And then we can also help out others become naturalized U.S. citizens by filling out a naturalization form that is actually going up on October. We have some efforts through the month of September to ensure that individuals, they have one last chance to submit their applications for citizenship before the naturalization fee goes up. So we want to make sure that those folks also get to take advantage of the lower fees that we have right now that are going up by middle of October.
That's great. Hope that every single one of them gets that done and is able to vote. We have a few minutes left, and a number of questions have come in around people's concerns about the possibility of a delay after November 3rd, or the possibility of accusations of fraud being leveled, even the possibility of the refusal of someone who appears to be the losing candidate to accept the outcome of the election. Is our peaceful transition of power threatened this November? A lot of people seem to be worried about it. What's your take, Lee Chapman?
Thanks. Well, I'm not calling it a delay, because with the influx of vote by mail ballots that we're going to see, we're going to have the most ballots we're going to see ever, probably in our country's history. It takes time to count those ballots. And as Suzy mentioned, one of the things that we're advocating for is to make sure that if there are any errors with people's signatures, that those voters are notified, they have an opportunity to cure. So it's going to take probably at least a week, if not longer, for the ballots to be counted. And that means that there's nothing wrong with the process. The process is just playing out the way it should be. So one thing that all of us as advocates, should be talking about is just normalizing that we're not going to know the election results on election night this year. I feel like everybody really wants these instant results where we know who the winner is, but we just need to make sure that the process plays out, that election officials can count those ballots. And that doesn't mean that there's any fraud happening or anything that's nefarious. It's really the process playing out as it should. So we just need to be, those ambassadors in our communities and just let people know that that's what we're going to be expecting this year.
So you're saying expect it to take a while, stay calm.
Yes.
And it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a hard message to hear, but we're hearing it. Eduardo, what are you counseling people on this score?
We seen it in Arizona. Every cycle for the last couple of years has been a tie race. We saw it in the election night in 2018 when Kristen Sinema and Martha McSally, the votes were like head to head, like counting votes and counting. And then we would see a front runner being McSally, then Sinema. And this is going to happen because our community are participating in record numbers. We saw an increase of participation of Latinos in the Arizona primary for 2020. We already surpassed record numbers from 2018. And because the electorate is changing and there are more independent voters, there are more voters of color that are coming in into participating in this election. We have more competitive races than ever before. And it's going to take every single vote to get counted to ensure that we have the winners on November 3rd. So we're going to be patient and we're going to be looking at the election results, but it's something that we're anticipating because as communities of color and new voters are coming out into participating in democracy, the races are getting closer and closer and closer. And it would take all of those ballots to get counted. And there is also an influx on election night for individuals that got a ballot on the mail that didn't get an opportunity to submit it through mail, that they go in on election day to drop it on any polling location. And that's totally okay, as long as you fill in your ballot, you sign it, you close the envelope, and you follow all the steps that are easy to participate. You can actually take that ballot into any polling location to make sure that ballot gets counted and your voice gets to be heard.
Gabriela, I want your advice to nervous voters too, but I want to first ask Suzy Smith a question that has come in. It's a very specific question. This person says, I'm concerned my mail-in vote won't be counted. My legal name is different from what I call myself. I usually sign with what I call myself, a nickname, but I'm not sure how I signed on my voter registration. My driver's license is signed using my nickname, though my legal name is on my license. Is there any way that I can find out?
Will you follow up and ask what state they live in, and I will figure it out? That is the incredible blessing and curse of our elections, is we have 50 different states, District of Columbia, territories, and they all have different systems. And want to make sure I give the most accurate answer, because you definitely want your ballot to count. But I think also, like Lee mentioned, this ballot curing process will be really important because we have such a rise in absentee voting. We want to make sure that anyone whose ballot is rejected, if we have the opportunity per state law, that we're able to cure that ballot and reach out to those voters. And that's what Vote From Home 2020 is going to be focused on in the states where we're working. And definitely want to make sure your vote is counted and that you use the signature that's going to get your ballot accepted. So if I can get your state, I will find it out.
That person just got back to us and said they are from California.
Okay, great. I will figure that out and maybe post it on Facebook or something like that. Or if they leave their email address private.
I will ask them if you can give us an answer, we'll get it back to them. We'll figure it out.
Okay, great. Yeah, and these are the questions. Yeah, these are the questions we're answering every single day on text message and phone calls through our incredible team of volunteers. We're all connected on a channel where we exchange information. You know, yesterday we had to send someone an application who's a blind voter, and just making sure this election is accessible for everyone, and doing really a concierge voter service, because it's confusing if you've never voted absentee before.
Okay, well, we will get this person their answer. Thank you for that. Gabriela, what is your advice to our many different communities? What do we do if we're nervous after November 3rd and the results haven't come in? What should our stance be? What do we do? How do we navigate that?
I mean, besides pray and light a candle.
That's a good start.
I think, I mean, those of us who were around in 2000 and watched the entire drama of the hanging chads and the Supreme Court, there are people like Lee who are great lawyers who are focused on, kicking in and let's get this done properly. I think we have a system, a democracy that functions for the most part, despite the voter suppressive challenges and some decisions made by the Supreme Court that maybe they shouldn't have made, but I'm not a lawyer. I mean, the point is, I think we need to be patient. And I think what has happened is we've become distrustful and impatient with one another, with our institutions. The reality is we do have a constitution. We don't have an overthrow of government. We're nowhere near any of that. And so, as worrisome as it seems, I think we just need to sit tight, and really, as organizations, we need to talk with one another, partner with one another, be good allies, and get information out as quickly as possible. There are lots of folks looking at this, and I have worked with the Leadership Conference for many, many moons. They're not alone. Every state has, at the local level, attorneys generals are not going to be saying, this is okay. There's a process, and we have to respect the process. And that is a democracy, and democracy can get a little messy sometimes. We're human beings. That's what we do.
Okay. Speaking of the messy democracy, Lee, earlier in the conversation, you referred to some of the historical barriers that voters are still experiencing in 2020. Which ones of them can we address right now, and which ones do we need to put an asterisk on for working on after the election?
That's a really good question. Well, we're trying to remove as many barriers as we can right now before the November election, the next 67 days. But, like Gabriela mentioned, there have been some Supreme Court cases in recent years that really have done a lot of damage. One being Shelby County versus Holder, which is a Supreme Court case in 2013 that gutted the heart of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5. So, the Voting Rights Act was the most effective piece of civil rights legislation. And Section 5 basically stopped discriminatory voting laws and policies from going into place. And in jurisdictions and states that had a history of voting discrimination. So like Georgia and Texas, North Carolina, before they made any voting change, whether that's closing a polling place or implementing a strict voter ID law, they had to have it approved by the Department of Justice or a federal court to make sure it didn't discriminate against people of color. So since 2013, we don't have that anymore. So states have been implementing, laws and policies that make it harder for people to vote. We did a report last year, and we found that there were over 1,600 polling places that closed in communities of color just since that Supreme Court case. And that was only in 13 states. We only looked at Arizona, Texas. Texas was number one with 750. Arizona was number two with 320. Georgia was number three with 214. So these are some really big issues, and the Supreme Court did a lot of damage with that decision. So there's a bill in Congress called the Voting Rights Advancement Act. It was actually renamed just last month as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And it's a bill that we've supported since that court decision that would restore the preclearance provision and prevent, the discriminatory voter purges, the closing of polling places, the strict voter ID laws, a lot of these really harmful measures that are happening right now. So, that's something that we'll be pushing for in Congress. It actually passed the House in December, and it's been sitting in the McConnell legislative graveyard for over 250 days now. So, we are going to continue to push and advocate for this bill until it becomes law.
That is good to know. I've got another question here. It says, I've seen several references to a large GOP financial commitment to monitoring voting. What does this mean? Is there any concern that polling places will be patrolled by those who will try to intimidate voters? Has there been any call for neutral observers? Does anybody have an answer on that one?
No, except that it's very well organized and they're spending a lot of money, and they're talking about 50,000 of these poll watchers, I guess. I think I'm not an expert in law, but it strikes me that state by state, there may have to be some counter moves. I don't think there's any clarity of how it's evolved. I think that's part of the challenge. And there's so many things we don't know. So there are voter protection programs all over the country as well. So that's what they're for, is to watch out for bad behavior from anybody. Hopefully these folks are going to be acting in the best interest of democracy and not against it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that is, I know the president, has recently called for police presence at the polling place, and he does not have the authority to send police to the polling place. And there are a lot of laws on the books that are actually prevent that, and it's illegal. So I just wanted to mention that because that's something that has been in the news recently through some of his comments on some of the news networks, but he does not have the authority to do that.
And to add, just like a small caveat, like if you can participate to vote by mail, do it. Request your ballot so that way you can do it from the comfort of your home and you can participate. And I think, again, all of this narrative is a way to intimidate voters from participating into this election.
That's right.
Yes. A lot of people have been asking if we will mail a recording of this webcast along with the links that everyone has shared to those who signed up on Zoom. We will. If you signed up on Facebook, or if you're watching us on Facebook or Twitter, you can get a hold of us at globalexchange.org, and we'll also be happy to send you a recording of the webcast and all the links and associated information that came with this webcast. We are nearly at the end of our hour, and we've answered most of our questions. I'm scanning here to see if anyone else has sent us questions. I'm not seeing any new ones. So I want to thank all of the panelists immensely for everything that you're doing and all the work that you've been doing for months, years, decades, and keep it up. We hope to be, in touch with you. We need to build a strong community, and we are extremely grateful for you participating this afternoon, as I think our viewers are as well. And we hope that everyone can share this webcast out far and wide so that many people can take advantage of the wisdom that we've heard from Suzy Smith, Gabriela Lemus, Lee Chapman, and Eduardo Sainz today. Thank you so much to all of you, to Vote from Home, to Mi Familia Vota, and to the wonderful leadership conference on civil and human rights. Thank you so much. And unless anyone has something else to say, we'll conclude the webcast with that. Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.